Welcome to the Table Podcast series with Bridget Johnson. Each month, we give you game-changing conversations about K-12 education and leadership. Join us as top educators, field experts, and administrators share actionable strategies to transform your school community. Let's dive in.
Welcome to The Table, the podcast where student life professionals, educators, and change makers come together to share stories, insights, and ideas for building communities where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Bridget Johnson. I am excited to welcome Kalima Fergus Ayele to the show. Kalima is the founder and CEO of Round Trip Ticket Home, an organization that helps educators reimagine school systems through design thinking. Her work focuses on moving leaders away from heroic leadership, where everything depends on one person, towards sustainable leadership infrastructure systems that allow schools to thrive without burning their people out. Today, we're talking about how to bridge the gap between vision and daily practice, and how to build systems that actually sustain your work instead of requiring you to be the hero holding everything together. Because, boy, we have definitely been there. Welcome to the show, Kalima. It's so great to have you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here, Bridget. I appreciate this. I'm so grateful to be able to speak with you and to connect with your community. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. So we're just going to jump right in. So let's start with the term heroic leadership because I love that. So what does that look like in practice, and why is it such a common pattern in schools and student life work?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say a lot of times it really is, again, it sometimes comes from a good place, right? We've got
Mm-hmm.
so many people who are committed and dedicated and want to show up for the community. And so you might end up, for a variety of reasons, with one, two, maybe even five people who are just like, they want to show up wherever they need to, right? Like whatever
Mm-hmm.
comes up, whatever fire they want to be the one.
I got it, right? All hands on deck. Yeah, I got you.
I have it. I got this, and sometimes again, especially if there's been a lot of change or instability, then people might feel like, hey, like you said, all hands on deck, right? That sort of
Mm-hmm.
energy of we just need to show up and do what needs to be done. But unfortunately, what this can lead to is something we think of like a single point of failure model, right?
Mm.
Where that person has become so pivotal to the survival of the school, the institution, the committee, the team, or whatever, that if they don't show up, nothing happens.
Nothing
And
happens.
so that's usually the biggest clue is if you have someone who mediates every conflict, who everybody knows that this person is the main decision maker, or that's the person who you need to get the thumbs up or the green light from, then you probably have defaulted to that model.
Mm.
And sometimes again, it's the person's personality, right? They're
Yeah.
charismatic, people like engaging with them, and so they end up being that sort of singular person. But it's not sustainable,
It's
and
not.
it
You're
actually
right.
ends up eventually leading to that person burning out, right?
Yep.
It's not a sustainable model. And
Mm-hmm.
then what happens, even for the organization, is you end up with, first of all, it's not resilient, right? So if anything happens, that person gets to
Yeah.
move, right? Everybody's covered. But we also have this issue of like, yeah, when the person's not there, whatever progress they made can leave with them. And
Yes.
so I'll say, like, it just, this was from my own experience. I'd come into a school and be like, hey, this is something that seems like it's missing, roll up my sleeves, and I'm going to move this thing forward. But what I found was that when I left, it stopped. And
Mm.
so, I'd reach out to former colleagues and say, hey, how's that project going? They'd be like,
What
this
project? No, no. We...
that project was your project. So I think,
Right.
again, I'm saying this because we've all been there.
Yes.
And you realize it was never really anchored into the infrastructure. Right. And to the, just think about it, even from the students or the families that we serve, it leads to inconsistency.
Yes.
They see their experience as being tied to a handful of people's energy level, right?
Yep.
So if those
Absolutely.
people are off, then somehow things are not flowing the way that they need to. So that's what I characterize as the challenge of that heroic leadership model. And
Gotcha.
so it does require a real thing, some self-reflection too on the part of the individuals who are like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, what is it about my ego that I feel like everything has
It
to rely
has to
on
go through.
me? So that's some work there. But
Yep.
even as an institution, how do we build systems and structures so that that doesn't happen?
So wonderful lead into my next question about infrastructure. But before we even get there, you talk about ego, I feel like the other thing is also if you've got one of those people who gets things done,
Yes,
they're the default because they are always getting things done. They're going to pick up the slack when the other people don't get things done, and
exactly.
so then they become the default because they know that that person's what I call the executioner. Like they're going
Yes,
to execute the
yes.
thing instead of putting more responsibility on those other folks who aren't quite executing as well
Hmm.
to give them some growth and leadership opportunities. And so we don't feel like we have time to do that because we're always moving 100 miles a minute, right? And so
Yep.
everyone's always like, no, got just get it done, just get
Let me
it
just
done.
get it done. Let me just get it
Exactly.
done. And you're exactly right, right? Like there are sometimes other underlying issues related to trust, related to our ability to delegate, related to
Hmm.
perfectionism, right? Like all of those things start creeping up. It's the old, group project scenario.
Exactly.
Call it the mimic,
Exactly.
right? We're like, if that person ain't gonna do it, let me just do it.
And then let me just go ahead because I don't have
Yes,
time. Like,
but
this is
this
my grade too.
exactly, exactly, exactly. But again, this is where it's important to really double down on just the clarity around roles and responsibilities. And with that, right, some acknowledgement of value that people bring to the group or to the team that that is divergent, right? It doesn't
Yes,
always look the
absolutely.
same. So
Doesn't
yes,
look the
you
same.
have to partner the executor with the visionary. You have to have the person who's the forest 30,000 feet. Then you have to have the person who's like boots on the ground, let's see the trees. And so really having those honest conversations is part of that. Is part of
Absolutely.
building that system because you want to be able to value all the people who are present and what they have to offer, and those are ongoing conversations, right? Because it's one of
Yeah.
the things that I think is very misleading is, we have these roles and we have these job descriptions, but it's okay, when there's a change in the team composition, to go back to those
Back.
roles,
Absolutely.
say, wait a minute, actually, based on your skill set, experience, knowledge base, or even just
Hmm.
interest and genius, let's talk about shoveling some of these things around. Well, even though this would typically be part of my job, and this is something you actually enjoy doing. So these are the ways we begin to look at building those pipes as I described them, right? Really
Hmm.
architecting a system, because you will get so much more out of a team when everybody's leaning in to their gifts, their talents, and what actually brings them joy and energy, right?
Yes.
And that's what I'm talking about, building at a
Hmm.
systems level, because then that's what trickles down to the culture of the community as a whole.
Absolutely. But I want to, I have another question. I was like, oh, I'm going to get to my infrastructure question, but you said something that triggered me. I was like, all right, so, because I have talked to schools often about making sure that when you talk about job descriptions and kind of the structure of the school, making sure that the position and the actual job itself can stand the test of time. And so it's not that
Mm,
you have allowed the job to morph into the people part of it in terms of what the person is good at. So then it turns into something that's not sustainable if a new person were to step into the role. Can you talk
mm.
about that a little bit? Because
Yeah,
I think that's important.
yeah. And I think that's what's wonderful. So one of the things that I was able to do, you know, for the past couple years where I've been building these, is actually have that conversation. Like, what is required of this role, right?
Yes.
And then what, so, it's traditions and requirements, right? So we talk
Yes.
about what is required of this role. Like, what do you have to do? And then the other piece is, okay, well, what do you do just because you're so used to doing it and you don't really think
Mm-hmm.
about whether or not it's necessary? And then what are
Yes.
the things you just prefer to do it? So it's called like TPR. So
Mm-hmm.
so traditionally you do the job like this, and you might
Uh-huh.
have gotten into a habit of doing it that way. It's okay to just step back for a second and say, why am I still doing this? Is this
Mm,
still what's needed? Is this still what's
yeah,
called for? And I think that needs to be a personal reflection, but also a team conversation.
absolutely.
So as a team, you're actually saying, I've been doing these things. This is why. Maybe it started because of something, and then we can talk about whether or not I need to do it. And then what's absolutely required, right? And
Hmm.
again, this is sometimes the eat the frog moment. Maybe I'm good at doing it, but this if I don't do
I
this,
love
I'm not
that.
doing my job. And
Right.
so really sitting down with like, yeah, you might have other things you enjoy doing, but this has to be done
Has to be
and
done.
it has to be done by you. And then there's the preferences, right? The little, you
Ooh, the
put your own
preferences.
sauce on
Yes.
it.
Yeah,
You put your own sauce
absolutely.
and you make it clear like actually this is something that I really love doing. This is something that I feel like I can bring to this role and I don't expect someone else to continue to do this because this is kind of my thing. But yeah,
I love that.
those
That's great.
conversations is so important.
Absolutely. So, all right, now I'm going to get to my infrastructure question. So,
Oh
you
yes,
talked
yes,
about
yes.
building a leadership infrastructure system or LIS, which I love. I think that's really great. Can you break that down for us? What is it and how is it different from the way most schools currently operate?
Again, we've already been talking about it, right? So a
Yep.
lot of it has to do with, first of all, again, and I think this is something that a lot of schools have done and do very well, is
Hmm.
being 100% clear on what your values are and making sure that there's a vision, there's a mission, there's values, and everybody's 100%. It's clear.
Yeah.
We know what
Hmm.
that is.
Yep.
And then what we can do with that, as you know, is that can go in so many different directions. You can have something we talk about called the vision of a graduate, right? Where we're
Hmm.
clear systematically, every faculty member knows, okay, this is what we're building toward. When
Yep.
when Sally walks across the stage, right? I know I've added this ingredient,
Yep.
whatever that thing is. Okay, so I think we do a pretty good job of doing that work. And
Hmm.
and then what I think some of those weaker areas are is really in terms of, well, then how does that come down to my individual role and responsibility? And
Mm.
so that's what we were just getting into the weeds about, which is, okay, so if we want to get here, this is where we're going, then how do we get there, right? That's the how. And
Yep.
what does that look like in terms of the year, right? This is really just comes down to strategic goal setting, right?
Yes.
What should I
Yep.
have as a measurable outcome by the end of the year, and then break that down to the quarter, then break that down to the month, and then
Yep.
what do our conversations look like so that we know we're supporting each other and moving in that direction. And so that's what I mean by the structure, right? What are the
Got it.
accountability measures? Because a
Hmm.
lot of times, again, we fall into this some habits of just being in reactivity mode, sort of showing up, we know what we're supposed to do, but it seems like it's far away. And
Yeah.
have you brought that down into, by the end of this week, and again, it depends on the role, what that rhythm is. But by the end of this week, when I have my one-on-one check-in, this is where I've gone. This is what I've taken, how I've moved the needle on this
Yeah.
goal that we set at the beginning of the year. And those are the conversations that I think need to happen with more intention
Mm.
and more consistency.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And so you mentioned building the pipes that allow vision of a graduate to flow through a school's daily operations. Can you give us a concrete example of what those pipes look like?
Yes, 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 exactly. So again, I think everybody from and every position should
Hmm.
have some clear goals for the year. And when we have our conversations, it's really centered around, what support do you need? What progress are you making? And, how do we get you there? And that's the thing. I think the more transparent we are about those conversations, the more
Yeah.
that environment is going to succeed, because I know what you're working on. I'm not falling into this trap. I'm just going to say it of, I'm so busy and I don't see so and so doing anything. I'm just going to say it. The
Just say
performative
it.
busyness, you minimize that, because
Yeah.
when we get together, we have our dashboard where we can share our updates, and we know exactly
Hmm.
what you're working on, and we know exactly how you want to be supported. And so again,
Exactly.
I do think just a lot of those really and here's the thing, a lot of people, they shy away because they think these type of structures are actually restrictive,
Mm,
but they're not. They really give you the flexibility, right? Because now you know where the guardrails are. And
exactly.
because you know where the guardrails are, you have all the freedom within those
Those
structures.
structures. Yep. There you go.
Yeah.
And so, when leaders start to realize that they're operating in heroic mode and want to shift towards a more sustainable system, how do you do that? That just seems like it could be so overwhelming.
I think it is, again, some of it involves breaking some patterns. Which
Yes.
I have to say, sometimes that's the hardest part of it, right?
Yep.
And of course, what we don't want is for it to get to a breaking point, right?
Right.
And those are the moments where we really do see, okay, something has to give because this is actually now shattered. And
Yep.
so just being able to say, wait a minute, I'm noticing this pattern in myself,
Hmm.
before it gets to this point. And again, I don't think it can be underestimated, the the value of bringing in someone who's not necessarily part of the
Part of
organization,
it.
not part of those patterns, to just ask questions, to just be in a position of curiosity and say, oh, okay, tell me a little bit about what your role is and what you're working on and what your goals are,
Hmm.
and having those type of questions from someone who, is a third party can be
Yes.
sometimes valuable, because some of the times you'll walk in and find they actually haven't done that. They actually haven't sat in a room together. Okay. And I'm speaking specifically, let's say, about a senior leadership team. They
Hmm.
haven't actually sat down and said, this is what I do day to day in front of one another. They haven't said, I make 10 calls every day, or this, you know what I mean? This is what my
Uh-huh.
daily rhythm looks like, or this is what my habits look like. And I think that's so powerful, just to have people be able to build trust
Absolutely.
and just be able to say, like, oh, I know that I'm in this position, but I see how the work that I'm doing is supporting the work that you're doing, even though we're in these different departments. And so trying to shift away from, again, some of those default modes, right, where sometimes these cabinet meetings actually end up being like narrative notes. People just have a chance to take the 15 minutes of fame and talk
Yeah.
about whatever, right? But
Right.
it's like, if you actually get rid of that, you can have another platform where people can share, here's the progress that I'm making toward the goals that
Right.
we talked about. And then when we come together, we're actually having strategic
Strategic
conversation.
conversations. Yes.
We're actually addressing some of those larger challenges that we want to move ourselves forward.
Yes, absolutely. I think oftentimes we meet with no clear kind of agenda or purpose for meeting because we're supposed to meet, and then all that stuff gets kind of jumbled together, and then you leave the meeting like, what
What
just
happened?
happened?
What just happened? What just happened? And we don't see the progress from one of those sessions to the next. And so,
Exactly.
again, being able to keep that documented, right, and have the
Yeah.
dashboard that shows the progress that's being made is just, it's powerful. And it is a shift, I'll say it, right? Because
Yeah.
there are always going to be a couple of people who benefited from the heroic model because it meant that they were able
Yeah.
to, they were able to slack off,
Yeah.
honestly. And now it's going to
Absolutely.
be clear who's not showing up. And so that's the risk, right? The risk that's involved is because there are those who benefit from the unsustainable model. And I just want to name that because I think it's important to say that sometimes you might have to, depending on the situation, introduce these things very slowly, right? Like,
Hmm.
really be, a little subtle
Small
about it.
bites.
Hey, let's
Hmm.
just try using this template for our meetings rather than, you know what I mean? Again,
Yep.
just just a suggestion. I just want to try something out for these next 6 weeks and see how it goes. But gradually shifting away from again an unsustainable model. And again, I recognize too that in a lot of ways this is when there's a transition, a change is when it makes sense to be like, oh, hey, since we have a new team member, since we have a couple new team members, let's revisit some of these things. So you might have to use timing or search
Yes.
circumstances as an entry point to really making some of these changes and adaptations.
Yeah, and sometimes it could just be a reset, right? It kind of bit like the new semester or there's a new
Yeah.
project coming. Like you need to be kind of read the room and think about kind of what would resonate with people as to why we're not maybe suddenly making a shift, that like we're kind of shifting and doing something a little bit different. Because
Yes.
when people don't
Accreditation.
understand the
Yeah.
why, people are like, what is happening here? You know, everyone
Yeah.
loves their comfort zone, right? And
Hmm.
so if you're
Hmm.
moving people away from their comfort zone, you need to talk about the why a little bit. And that piece
Yes.
about transparency is super important. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
So, I love the fact that you're such a world traveler. And I love also, your newsletters that you give to us on a regular basis. And the one that you put out recently talked about wabi sabi. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I think it's awesome. It's the art of imperfect, let me get it right, imperfect innovation. And
Yeah.
so, how does embracing imperfection help leaders? Because I think leaders feel like they have to be perfect and they have
Yeah.
to get everything right the first time. And so, if they're trying to implement this new way of meeting and this new way of thinking in terms of, systems and process, it can sometimes not go well the first time. And so, then that makes people hesitant in terms of thinking about how they can actually move forward and then they stay stuck. So, can we talk about that a little
Of
bit?
course. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And so yeah, just to give some context, I have I've been so grateful for the opportunity that I had this past fall to travel to Asia, for about 6 weeks. And I want to say sometimes there's just a gift, and I know maybe it doesn't work that way for everybody, but there's a gift of
Hmm.
just being away from your normal environment. I'll say it like that, right? Just being in a new
Yes.
environment that kind of forces you first of all to kind of look up from your screen and just be like, okay, where am I going? You spend a lot of time just
Yeah.
and and really being able to engage with just some of the mindsets and philosophical dispositions of a completely different culture, right? Which I think is so valuable because I can constantly then look for like, oh, how would this look or could this work? And you know, Japan had so many wonderful elements to it, and I
Hmm.
really continue to mine some of those experiences. But I remember thinking about this idea of like, yeah, how is our sense of perfectionism really a hindrance to progress? And, to me, it almost goes back even to the fixed and growth mindset when we used to have those
Mm.
conversations in education,
Yeah.
for during the last decades or so. And this
Yeah.
idea of, we were so good at identifying it in students, but I don't think we did as good a job of as seeing it
Nope.
themselves and really giving ourselves the opportunity to just try something different, even if we know it's not going to be perfect.
Hmm.
And again, I get it, right? A lot of times we're in these spaces where, yeah, you will be judged. People are going to, and as you said, some of it just coming from their own fear because
Yep.
people want to stay in their comfort zone. And so, as much as we see the changes happening on the world stage, sometimes the result of that is people even becoming a little bit more restricted and like, okay, so what do I have control over? Right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But as leaders, I think it's our responsibility to at least to what extent we can to move against that and
Hmm.
really to embrace the idea of like, we don't know. We don't know how
Right.
this is going to unfold, but we know we can't stay where we are. And really being able to show that process of
Hmm.
growing through, again, through learning and reframing what failure even means in the first place. And so
Oh,
again,
right. And then isn't that what we teach our students?
that's what we
Like,
exactly. And so this is my whole point. I'm like, this, we need to reflect all of that ourselves. And I think it's okay for that to be very explicit with students
yes.
to say, hey, I want to try a new thing here. And let's just see how it
Mm-hmm.
goes. And I want your feedback. And this is where the prototyping and the testing and the measurable observation comes in, because then we're constantly having these conversations, and this is where we can tap into the power of our empathy, right? Because we're constantly going to be seeing and observing how are these changes impacting everyone around us. So
Yes.
yeah, I do. I think it's going to have to be our way of being, right? Because we things are changing so rapidly, and some of these old systems are already breaking down. Like, it's not this. There is an
Yes.
option of staying where we are. This is
Exactly.
not an
We
option.
can't. It's just not an option anymore. Absolutely. And so let's get practical. So if
Mhm.
someone's listening and thinking, I need to stop being the hero and build some infrastructure, what's one framework or protocol they can start using this week?
So I would say if we even started with something like the RRS, I call it.
Okay.
Okay. So this is one of those where, again, you might just have to have this start with the personal for now.
Okay. Yeah,
What you bring
absolutely. Start with yourself. Yeah.
in. And I think it's okay to do what I call just a friction audit. So just
Mm-hmm.
think through your day and look at what were the moments that really drained your energy. Like,
Mm.
you can say, okay, what happened, and just have it be like a little day journal, right? Like,
Yeah.
here's what I did from this time to this time, and I spent 10 minutes here and 15 minutes here, and I spent an hour on this. And then really just keep checking in with your own system and just be like,
Yeah.
at what moments did I feel drained, or
Okay.
what happened that caused me to feel drained? And I would just start by actually, sort of flagging those moments. We'll just call
Okay.
it a friction flag.
Okay.
And at that moment for the RRS, we're calling it reflect, reset, and systemize. You're just going to ask yourself, what was it about that moment where,
Mm-hmm.
again, this is where the heroism thing comes in, where I put myself out, right? Like, the
Yeah.
reason why you were exhausted was because you overextended yourself in some way. And the reset comes from going back to the values, right? So the values of the institution, or it could be your personal values. I actually encourage people to do both, like do
Yeah.
an exercise as a team where you talk about the values of the institution, but also walk through an exercise where you think about your own personal values as
Absolutely. So
well,
important. Yeah.
and really take a moment to think about what values are coming up for me. And most of the time, it's the energy drain. It's because whatever we're doing in that moment is out of alignment
Mm.
with our values. And so that gap is what's
Mm-hmm.
causing the energy loss. And so now you want to think about what system you can put in place so that you can conserve your energy in that moment. Now, it could just be that you have to change something. And I'm just throwing this out there, but maybe
Sure.
maybe you have these standing meetings in the afternoon, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just the time of day. Is it possible for you to change that to a walking meeting? I know it's cold outside, but I'm just using that as
Yeah,
an
no.
example.
Sometimes it's fresh air.
Sometimes you can take a walk, especially if there's no need to take notes or look up documents. If this is something that you can do, I remember I used to do this a lot when I worked at a school that was near Central Park.
Mm-hmm.
We would be able to take a walking meeting, particularly if there are some things that you might, again, being careful about the confidentiality of what you need to
Sure.
discuss, but just having a small change like that You still have the interaction you need to have, but now you actually find yourself, instead of feeling maybe drained by that conversation just because of the time of day, or maybe even the heaviness of what you had to discuss, that small tweak could make a big difference in how you
Yes.
feel at the end of that meeting. So again, I'm just using that as a practical
Oh,
idea,
I love that.
and I think it's one that a lot of people can use, particularly like you said, if you notice, hey, this is a moment which causes a lot of energy loss or friction.
Hmm.
What are the ways in which I can tweak this?
And that's a small step. That's a small tweak.
Yeah.
Like just changing your environment, right? Just getting
Hmm.
outside, getting out of the office can really make a huge difference. I love that. So, next question. What are the signs that a leadership system is actually sustainable versus just another thing a leader is forcing to work through sheer willpower? Like, just trying to
Yeah.
gut through it and say, we're going to get through this no matter what. Because that's not sustainable either,
No,
right?
no. And people say it all the time, but it's sometimes there's just an energy. There's an energy of the space where things are flowing, where people are working well. It's not this sort of performative niceness, right? Because
Right.
sometimes that can also be draining when people are
Yep.
not, when there's just inauthenticity and people are showing up but they don't feel like they can be themselves. And so I do think you'll begin to notice that the systems are sustainable when things are functioning even when you're not there. That's the biggest clue. If
Yes.
you can spend, and again, I get it, there's always a chance that an emergency is going to happen, but if
Sure.
you can
Absolutely.
actually spend a day at a conference and not have to check your phone or your email every 5 minutes,
Right.
that means things are functioning.
I love that.
Things are functioning. So how can you make sure that the people that you work with, or everybody in that environment, actually feels empowered,
Mm-hmm.
right? That people are
Yeah.
not constantly second guessing themselves, because again,
Ah,
the way that perfectionism can be pervasive, it means that if you don't, the people are afraid of making a mistake, then the teachers are afraid of, like, it trickles into the entire environment.
absolutely. It absolutely does. And so, that's such a great point that you make because then it builds confidence for everyone around you. And so then everyone can do their job and feel confident in their job, but they might have to do a little bit of your job too if you're not there. And so people won't
Exactly.
be afraid to do that,
They
right?
won't be afraid. It doesn't have to wait until so and so gets back.
Gets back. I love that. And so we talked earlier about this heroic leadership and how it exposes some people who have been just kind of just skating along or maybe just kind of floating, coasting. And so how do you get buy-in from a team when you're trying to shift away from that heroic leadership for those people who have prefer the old way of doing things or
Yeah,
real comfortable? How do you
yeah.
how do you make that shift for those folks who are
And
like, nah,
again,
this is good. I like to float.
of course. And I would say that for some people it really is a lack of trust, right?
Hmm.
They prefer they prefer that model because they don't trust. They don't trust
Yeah.
the system to work. And sometimes, there in change leadership, they always talk about the fact that there will be early adapters. There'll be people who are like,
Right.
yeah, let's try it, let's try it. And then you do have to give more time for folks who
For
need to
those
give
other folks.
time
Hmm.
to actually see that it works, that this actually protects them from burning out, and it actually
Yes.
provides the clarity that they need to be able to do their own job better as well. Because
Yes.
they're also, even though you might be seeing them as kind of flying below the radar, the reality is they're not showing up as their best self either, right? And
Hmm.
part of that is because there was no clarity. So they were just
Right.
like, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to sort of
Mhm.
do nothing. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like you said, the kid in the group project who isn't contributing.
Yeah.
So when you actually say, no, 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 this is exactly what I need, and this is exactly how you're going to report and share with the rest of the team, then it's kind of like, okay, everybody knows what they're going to do, as opposed to the, well, if that person didn't do it, I'm just going to do it for them. So,
Love that.
yeah.
So, Clema, what keeps you passionate about this work?
Oh, wow. I mean, I think a lot of it is just the I call it the spirit of possibility, right? Like, I do think that so many of us have felt stuck, like we don't know that there's another way. There's whether it be work, again, in leadership, or even in our personal lives, we just think, well, this is how it is, and it's like, no, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so for me, what I feel excited about, um, first of all, is just the opportunity to really share these tools. I mean, they're rooted in design thinking, and so for me, it's so exciting because I feel like I finally found something that combines, the left brain, the analytical side, and the right creative side. I feel like there's a structure that I can actually share with people that actually allows them to tap into more of their whole self. And I do think that's a part of what's been missing in our work lives, right? Is that people feel like, well, I have all of these gifts and talents, but this world only calls for this sliver of who I am, and so that's all that I'm going to bring. And so now for me, just having these opportunities to create spaces where people can bring more of themselves into this
Yeah.
process. And that's been amazing, right? Because then you see leaders who don't have to carry the whole school on their
Yes.
backs. And it
Absolutely.
really has been a phenomenal opportunity, like this one school that I'm working on, and he's a dynamic leader who has a vision for being able to serve and support other schools, and he's able to do that now because those
Nice.
structures and those systems are in
Are
place
in
that
place.
allow him to be able to step away and think about the ways in which he can support programming in other institutions. And so stuff like that, which I think is so important, right? It's so important, especially in this moment where we see the wheels falling off, right? When people are saying like
Yep.
literally, oh, this we
Literally.
11th hour. Okay, we passed the 11th hour now. It's like,
Right. What's after 11th hour? Because,
we're here. It's game time.
right.
So if people don't have, right, the energy and the capacity to show up in this moment, it's over. So
It's
anyway, I
over.
hate to be like doomsday.
No, but we got
That's
it.
how
There's
I
some truth
feel.
there. We got to tell the truth, right? State the
It's
facts.
go time. It's go time. So the talent that we have, the leadership, the potential, what we want to bring out in our students and our young people, this is the time now to bring that into fruition.
I love it. And so, Kalima, tell us a little bit more about Round Trip Ticket Home and what you do and how people can get in touch with you.
Yes, definitely. So, just as I shared here, we support schools and school leadership teams with putting structures in place so that they experience greater energy, greater capacity, so they can move toward their visions. And that's been an amazing opportunity. I am on all the platforms, so
Okay.
I'll share my links. I'll be at NAIS Thrive
Okay.
this year. I'm not sure when this is coming out, but I'll be there in Seattle. So I'll be presenting there and would love
Awesome.
to have folks at my workshop and connect as well. I will also be offering some online experiences just so that people can get a better idea of what my framework is. So I do that pretty much on a monthly basis.
Okay.
And so I also have a weekly newsletter, as you mentioned. And
Yes,
so we
he
can
does.
just stay connected and check out my website so you can join the newsletter as well.
Awesome. And we'll put all those things in the links after the podcast. But last question for you. Is there anything we haven't talked about today that you think is essential for leaders to understand as they try to make this shift?
Well, really, what I have to say is that the transitions are inevitable, right? We
Yeah.
know that we're going through massive changes. And I just want to encourage everyone that really by building those structures now, it doesn't have to feel like a big pendulum swing. You can do it slowly. You can just be building again, just like laying brick by brick. You aren't just solving the issues that you're finding in this moment, but you're actually providing a gift for the school that you're going to become. And so I really do want to encourage folks to put that work in because it's worth it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kalima. It's been
Thank
such a pleasure to have
you.
you here today. And this conversation about moving from heroic leadership to sustainable systems is one that so many of us need to hear, especially when we're exhausted from trying to hold everything together on our own, because we don't need to do this work on our own. And so, as Kalima mentioned, you can visit Round Trip Ticket Home, and we're going to put all that stuff at the end of the podcast today. And she's got newsletter, she's got webinars, so join her there. And she will also be at NAIS, so make sure you check her out there. And so I also want to let folks know that we have some exciting news to share, that the Dean's Roundtable is now on Instagram and TikTok. Follow us for leadership insights, community building resources, and conversations that matter to student life professionals. Just search for the Dean's Roundtable on both platforms and join the conversation. If you're enjoying the table, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, or leave us a review. It really helps more people find us. Thanks for pulling up a chair at the table today. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about, or maybe even something to try out in your own community. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time at the table. Have a
Thank you
good
so
one.
much, Bridget. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kalima. Such a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Table Podcast Series. Is your student life program delivering on your mission? Our new K-12 student life assessment moves you beyond anecdotes to evidence-based decisions. Through comprehensive stakeholder surveys and expert analysis, you'll get concrete insights across 8 essential dimensions of student life, from culture and wellness to staff effectiveness and resource allocation. We're seeking founding partner schools to be the first to experience this transformative assessment process and help shape the future of student life evaluation. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Kalima Fergus Ayala, produced and edited by Andrick Sigmund, and music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And, as always, thanks again for listening.